Well, welcome back, folks, to C Files. Thanks for joining me. We can sit and vegetate for hours in front of a screen doing this. For me, my generation was a TV screen. You guys got some TVs that are humongous now, or even a computer screen, watching movies or videos. Or we could read a good book and engage our brain. What do you choose? This is how I choose to spend my time. All right. And we're in the Battle of Christmas, or Battle for Christmas, by Stefan Nissenbaum. I'll show you the book. There you go. That's what it looks like. That's the way I can do that. I can get it on screen. Um, Great book. I recommend you go buy it and read it. It's really good. Um, and I'm starting chapter 5, Under the Christmas Tree, A Battle of Generations. Now, this is a history of Christmas in the United States. It's subtitled A Cultural History of America's Most Cherished Holiday. Christmas trees become controversial, actually, in our generation. Lately, it's become controversial, especially among Christians. Um, so this should be an interesting chapter to see where did it come from, how did it develop, what's the history of the Christmas tree, especially in the United States. Introduction: From Disorder to Selfishness. Every solution generates its own problems, and the child-centered consumer Christmas was no exception, particularly for people who found such a celebration most appealing. The concern those people came to feel was actually rooted in broad issues of child rearing within the new middle class family, and it came to a head in their fears about what a child-centered consumer Christmas might do to their children's character. This chapter, I'm sure they're concerned about spoiling their kids. This chapter will examine the intersection of a new way of celebrating a holiday with just those broader cultural issues. It will suggest that the introduction of Christmas trees represented an effort to cope with the problems posed by the child-centered Christmas. In about 1830, the literature of Christmas in America began to change. Before that date, it dealt chiefly with questions of social disorder. Afterward, a new concern emerged, an anxiety about private selfishness and greedy consumerism, especially as those issues affected children. Young people themselves had previously been seen as a source of disorder at Christmas, along with the poor. Do not let your children and servants run too much abroad at nights, as that 1719 Boston Almanac had warned. As part of the process by which middle class young people were separated from the lower orders of society, they were created as children, a process explored in chapters 3 and 4. But consequently, they now began to be seen as easy prey to materialism, superficiality, and selfishness. Middle class Americans were becoming concerned that the holiday season was an infectious breeding ground for juvenile materialism and greed. Consumerism was coming to supplant chaos as the new problem of the holiday season. The battle for Christmas was beginning to change from a physical struggle that pitted the classes against one another into a moral one that divided the generations. That is the context in which the Christmas tree became an American holiday tradition. In fact, it was what lay at the heart of the emerging middle class interest in the rituals of Christmas in Germany, of which the Christmas tree was the preeminent example. So maybe we need to get the history of the Christmas tree in Germany at some point. As we shall see, These rituals were associated with children who were not selfish and for whom Christmas was an opportunity to give as well as to receive. There is a belief among those who care about such things that the Christmas tree was spread throughout American culture by German immigrants. There is some truth to this, but much like the notion that Santa Claus was brought to these shores by the Dutch settlers of New Amsterdam, such a belief also conforms to our desire to see our Christmas customs as rooted in something old-fashioned and authentic, in ancient folk ways, untainted by the marketplace. But Christmas trees became widely known in the United States during the mid 1830s, almost a decade earlier than any broad-based immigration from Germany can be said to have occurred. As it turns out, the most important channels through which the ritual was spread were literary ones. Information about the Christmas tree was diffused by means of commercial literature, not via immigrant folk culture from the top down, not from the bottom up. It was by reading about Christmas trees, not by witnessing them, that many thousands of Americans learned about the custom. Before they ever saw such a thing, they already knew what Christmas trees were all about. Not only what they looked like, but also how and why they were to be used. I shall deal one by one with each of the sources through which Christmas trees were introduced into middle class American culture during the 1830s. Each source, as we shall see, reveals in turn a different element with which this ritual was associated. First, the element of surprise. Second, that of folk authority. That of folk authenticity. Third, unselfish children. And finally, paternal control or parental control. So, once again, it's surprise, folk authenticity, unselfish children, and parental control. Who were the writers who introduced the Christmas tree into American culture? The evidence suggests that, much like the Knickerbockers who devised Santa Claus, these writers constituted something of a distinct set. Like the Knickerbockers, the members of this set were genteel and cultured, but they were part of an emerging middle, I'm sorry, but they were a part of an emerging upper middle class that laid no claim to preserving an aristocratic social order. In contrast to the Knickerbockers, too, they lived mostly in New England and Philadelphia, not New York, and the church of their choice was Unitarian rather than Episcopal. And instead of being politically reactionary, they tended to stand somewhere on the progressive, reformist side of the issues that were coming down to divide Americans in the 1830s. This is not to say that the members of this set were of a single mind on every matter. After 1830, as we shall see, they were divided over the emerging anti-slavery movement and also over issues of child rearing. But in any event, they used culture rather than politics as an instrument to influence the social order. They employed their cultural authority, a combination of literary skill and access to the most popular channels of print, and a strenuous effort to deal with what they feared were the corruptive cultural effects of consumer capitalism, especially on the young. The Christmas tree played a serious, if relatively minor, role in that larger project. Some Christmas trees, Little Charlie's Christmas tree. There's no document about the Christmas tree that corresponds with Clement Clark Moore's verses about Santa Claus. Instead, there are only various legends that describe how the Christmas tree came to America. One of these legends is about Hessen soldiers, that would be German soldiers, during the American Revolution. It dates the real event too early. Another is about Queen Victoria and her German-born husband, Prince Albert. It dates the event too late. What is probably the most famous of the legends, and the one with which we shall begin, has it that the first American Christmas tree was set up in Massachusetts in 1835 by Charles Follen, a German immigrant who had become an American citizen and a Harvard professor. The source of that legend is a popular book written by a very famous British visitor to the United States, a woman named Harriet Martineau, who happened to witness the Follen's tree when she was touring New England. As Martineau wrote, quote, I was present at the introduction into the new country of the German Christmas tree. I butchered that accent. We'll try better. Though this was not the first American Christmas tree, it is certainly true that Charles Follen set up a Christmas tree in Martineau's presence for his son and namesake. An enduring 5-year-old, whom everybody called Little Charlie, it is time to visit the scene. The tree, actually the top portion of a fir or spruce, had been placed in the front drawing room of the house. A toy hung from every branch, and when Martineau arrived, Charles Follen and his wife were just adding the 7 dozen little candles, 7 dozen little wax candles. How would they put candles on a tree and not burn the house down? That's what I want to know. As little Charlie and two older companions approached the house, the adults quickly closed the door to the front drawing room and moved into an adjacent room where, as Martineau put it, they sat around trying to look as if nothing was going to happen. After the visitors were served tea and coffee, a round of parlor games was played in an effort to distract the children's attention from the front drawing room where Charlie's parents were now busy lighting the candles. Fire marshal today would have a heart attack. The element of surprise was crucial here, and as we shall see, it was something that distinguished the Christmas tree ritual from other modes of presenting children with their gifts. Finally, the double doors were drawn open, and the children poured in, their voices instantly hushed. Their faces were upturned to the blaze, all eyes wide open, all lips parted, all steps arrested. Nobody spoke, only Charlie leaped for joy. Was that a better accent? After a few moments, the children discovered that the tree bore something eatable or edible. And the babble began. What? The babble began again, whatever the babble is. The children were told to take what they could from the tree without burning themselves on the candles. Well, they like playing dangerous games with that, didn't they? Martineau reported that we tall people kept watch and helped them with good things from the higher branches. That's interesting. They would actually get their goodies off of the tree. After the children had eaten their full, after the children had eaten their fill of the edibles, sugar, the evening continued with dancing. Yeah, I hope so. Get the energy out of those kids. And mugs of steaming mulled wine. No, don't give the kids the wine, okay? By 11, all the other guests had gone home. Little Charlie was in bed, probably squirming because of all that sugar. I got to focus on that, folks. And Harriet Martineau herself was left alone with the boy's parents, Charles and Eliza Follen. It had been a delightful evening, and Martineau concluded her account by predicting that the Christmas tree ritual would surely become an established American tradition. Carl Follen's story. Now, I'm at I got 15 more minutes. I will not make it through this whole thing in 15 minutes, I don't think. I'm going to give it a try. Harriet Martineau's story of little Charlie Follen's Christmas tree was accurate enough, even if it was not the first American Christmas tree. But in an important way, the story was misleading. For when Martineau reported the episode, she placed it in a context that implied that she had simply stumbled upon it during the course of her travels. The episode appeared as part of a catch-all chapter in Martineau's book, a chapter she called Hot and Cold Weather, about seasonal phenomena in New England. Martineau's evening with the Follens was anything but an accident of travel, and it hardly took place as part of the ordinary New England seasonal cycle. Martineau and the Follens had met only a few months earlier, but in the course of those few months, they had become fast personal friends and political allies in a cause that was changing the course of their lives. Harriet Martineau had gone to visit the Follens that evening to chart their mutual plans at a moment of crisis, a crisis that was forcing them to make a difficult choice between their personal principles and their professional careers. The issue that precipitated the crisis was nothing less than the movement to abolish slavery in America. It is a story that bears telling in some detail. If Charles Follen had not died in 1840 at the age of 43 in the explosion of a steamship, he would, in all probability, be remembered today in connection with something more important than the American Christmas tree. Even as it stands, however, Follen's career is fascinating. Somewhat like Thomas Paine before him, he was a radical on two continents. Even before coming to America in 1825, in his late 20s, Follen had been exiled from Germany and then from Switzerland for his revolutionary activities. Carl Follen, as he was named at birth, was no simple product of German folklore. He was a scion of the German elite, the son of a respected judge, almost the German equivalent to Clement Clark Moore. But early in his life, Follen moved in a very different direction than Moore. He became a youthful revolutionary, a representative of the emerging liberal nationalist movement in Germany. As a university student, Follen authored an incendiary political song and was actually arrested com complicity in a political murder. He was acquitted. Appointed a member of the faculty at the University of Jena in 1820, at the age of 24, Follen continued his political activities and was forced into exile in Switzerland, where he received another professional position. But 4 years later, he was compelled to flee once again in the face of new charges that he had organized a revolutionary cell. This time, Follen found refuge in America. He arrived in New York, having learned English during the voyage, and bearing letters of introduction from another European revolutionary, the aged Marquis de Lafayette, who suggested that he try to find employment in the Boston area. Follen followed that advice and headed for Cambridge. Even before he arrived on New England soil, Folan stopped off in New York to meet a woman we have already met, the writer Catherine Maria Sedgwick, whose novel Redwood was the first book he had read in the English language. Catherine Sedgwick obviously admired Folan's intelligence and culture, his geniality, and his Republican principles. The following summer, she invited him to Stockbridge, Massachusetts, to meet the rest of the Sedgwick clan. Then, that fall, Sedgwick introduced Folan to one of her oldest and most intimate friends, Eliza Cabot of Boston. 2 years later, Folan and Cabot married, and in 1830 they had a child, who was christened Charles after the English version of his father's name. Charles Folan, as he is now being called, had fallen in love with the United States, a nation that promised to fulfill the Republican values for which he had been striving vainly in Europe. He worked hard to make a new career in his new home, and in this he was eminently successful. Living in Cambridge, Folan authored books on the German language, as yet little studied in the United States, and taught German part-time at Harvard. He even established and ran a gymnasium in the Harvard area. Above all, he formed close ties with the liberal Unitarian establishment that dominated Harvard and Boston. Folan was a deeply religious man, as well as an enlightened Republican, and he found Unitarianism wholly compatible with his own progressive Christian beliefs. In 1830, 5 years after his arrival in America, Folan reached what would prove to be the pinnacle of his new life. That year, he was made a minister in the Unitarian Church and he became a U.S. citizen. Most important of all, he was appointed to a full-time faculty position at Harvard. A new professorship of German literature that had been given 5 years 5 years of funding by a group of his admirers, with the expectation that Harvard would pick up the tab thereafter. Little Charlie was born in 1832. No, let me try it again. Little Charlie was born in 1830, comma, two, Too. And the next year, the family moved into a new house. Folan was flying high. But within less than 5 years, the radical um, comments that had brought him to America in the first place brought him down once again. This time, the issue was slavery, a subject that was just beginning to arouse feelings of urgent intensity in a handful of Americans. In 1831, William Lloyd Garrison began publishing his abolitionist journal, The Liberator, in Boston, where that same year he organized the American Anti-Slavery Society. Folan quickly sensed the parallels between the anti-slavery movement and the principles he had stood for in Germany. By 1834, he had become one of the most dedicated of Garrison's followers. He even helped organize a Cambridge Anti-Slavery Society based at Harvard. But radical abolitionism did not sit well with most Northerners, even with the Boston Unitarian establishment, whose members were offended by what they regarded as its vulgar style, as well as its constant insistence that abolition be total and immediate. William Lloyd Garrison was regarded by most of Folan's acquaintances as a crazy man, and a rather uncouth one at that. Even Folan himself was occasionally critical of Garrison's style, though never of his principles. Charles Folan was warned that becoming an active abolitionist would surely jeopardize his professional prospects, but he was too much a man of principle to let that get in the way. Anyway, through he had been through it all before back in Europe. His fall was heroic. In early 1834, Follen became an active member and officer of the New England Anti-Slavery Society. He did so against the urgings of his Harvard colleagues, who warned him that it would cost him his position. The professorship would expire in 1835, and only at that point would it be made permanent or else terminated. In fact, Follen would be coming up for tenure. Follen's friends were, of course, correct. Early in 1835, he learned that his appointment would terminate at the end of the spring semester. He and his family, little Charlie turned 5 that year, would be left high and dry with no source of income. Elizabeth Follen may have been born into the prominent Cabot family, but she had few resources of her own, and the family did not come to assist in this occasion. For the moment, though, Follen was rescued by his remaining admirers, who arranged for him to have what appeared to be an ideal position. He would oversee the education of 2 children of a wealthy Boston merchant, James Perkins, who had recently died, and whose widow was emotionally incapacitated. In return for this part-time work, Follen was to have the use of the Parkins' house, and he would be paid a comfortable annual salary of $2,000. The fortune of the Follens seems like a fairy tale. Catherine Sedgwick wrote when she learned the good news. This time it was Follen's educational principles that got him into trouble. Follen took the teaching of children seriously indeed. He was committed to a progressive pedagogical, um, uh, pedagogical, pedagogical strategy, derived largely from the work of the Swiss reformer Johann Pestalozzi. Pestalozzi. Pestalozzi assumed that children were intrinsically perfect creatures to begin with. How did he come to that one? And the education should therefore consist in the cultivation of those attributes that were already present in their young souls. Follen wrote in what amounted to his job proposal that he intended to study their natures so as to awake every dormant energy the boys already possessed, the 2 boys already possessed. This was the kind of approach that struck many people, including many Unitarians, as leading inevitably to an indiscriminate parental indulgence of children in their immature desires and whims. What happened next is not wholly clear, but it appears that Follen's political enemies used his progressive educational ideas against him, and when Foley, predictably enough, refused once again to retreat from his principles, he learned that he was once again out of a job. The bad news arrived in mid-December 1835, just a couple of weeks before Christmas. As if they were, as if that were not enough, Follen's personal crisis was part of a larger crisis in the abolitionist movement. The last months of the year 1835 witnessed a serious series of verbal and physical attacks on the abolitionist movement. Abolitionists later referred to this period as a reign of terror. In October, William Lloyd Garrison was physically assaulted by a mob which dragged him through the streets of Boston with a halter around his waist. Most Bostonians were convinced that Garrison's own behavior had brought on such treatment, and indeed that additional steps had to be taken to prevent the abolitionists from provoking further public disorder. With additional pressure coming from southern quarters, the Massachusetts legislature was soon considering a law that would effectively ban most abolitionist activities. Charles Follen played a role in that episode too. Early in 1836, he testified against the proposed anti-abolitionist bill at a large legislative hearing. On that occasion, he was silenced by the committee chairman and threatened with charges of contempt. Through these trying hours, as always, Follen maintained his characteristically calm, patient demeanor, but he did not retreat a single inch. He was a man of extraordinary principle and tenacity, an intellect, or an intellectual, who was, above all, an effective moral leader, a genteel counterweight to William Lloyd Garrison. But he was also a man without a job, and it was in connection with these troubles, just in time for the end of the Christmas season, that Harriet Martineau came to visit. I'm at 30 minutes. I usually cut off at 30 minutes, and I can't get through this next section fast enough to make it below 40. So we're going to pick up next time on page 184, Harriet Martineau's story. All right. I hope you're enjoying the book. We are over halfway through the book, actually. Yeah, over halfway through. Well, yeah, I'd say, yeah. Anyway, hope you guys are enjoying the reading. That actually was a very interesting section. Uh, the connection between Christmas trees and the abolitionist movement. I never expected that. And remember, this is the first time I'm reading these books. I'm learning right along with you guys as I'm reading. So, uh, anyway, God bless you guys. Thanks for joining me here on the C Files. I will be back tomorrow with more, hopefully. I have a really busy day tomorrow, but I'm going to try to get some things in tomorrow. Uh, like I say, I don't sit and waste my time. I'd rather read a good book. God bless you guys. I'll see you next time here on the C Files.